The Vorthak Empire had been the nightmare of every peaceful world for 300 long years. Their war machines were monsters of metal and death, each battlecruiser stretching 10 kilometers from nose to tail. These ships could crack planets in half and turn entire star systems into graveyards. No one dared to fight them anymore. The galaxy had learned to bow down or burn. On Nexus Station, the most important meeting place in known space, panic filled the air like poison gas. The emergency council chambers buzzed with fear as delegates from dozens of worlds gathered around the massive holographic display. Ambassador Quelix, whose blue-scaled skin glistened with nervous sweat, stood at the center of it all. His people, the Meridians, lived in the deep oceans of 7 different worlds, but even their underwater cities couldn't hide from Vorthak fury. Quelix's voice shook as his translation device converted his underwater speech into words the others could understand. The device crackled with static, making his desperation sound even more heartbreaking. Please, you must understand. 12 of their dreadnoughts are already jumping through hyperspace. They're coming for Tau Ceti, and they want everything. Complete. Surrender in 48 hours, or they'll turn our colonies into ash. The reptilian delegates from Scalaris Prime, with their long necks and cold yellow eyes, made soft hissing sounds of worry. They had seen what happened to worlds that defied the Vorthak. Nothing survived. Not the cities, not the forests, not even the bacteria in the soil. The crystalline beings from the shard worlds, who looked like living diamonds and spoke through. Light patterns remained completely silent. Their rainbow colors had dimmed to almost gray, which everyone knew meant they were terrified. Counselor Thexian, an elderly being whose people had been fighting the Vorthak for 50 years, slowly shook his head. His wrinkled face showed nothing but defeat. There's nothing we can do, 12 dreadnoughts. That's enough firepower to sterilize 100 worlds. The Tau Ceti system is lost. Other voices joined in, each one adding to the sense of hopelessness. The insect-like Chitari clicked their mandibles nervously, while the plant-based Verdani rustled their leaves in what sounded like whispered prayers. Everyone knew the truth that no one wanted to say out loud. The Vorthak Empire was unstoppable. They had the biggest ships, the deadliest weapons, and the cruelest hearts in the galaxy. But then something impossible happened. The sensor arrays around Nexus Station, devices so sensitive they could detect a coin dropped on a planet 3-star. Systems away suddenly went crazy. Alarms screamed through the chambers, and the main display flickered as new data poured in. Every delegate turned to look at the screen, expecting to see the Vorthak Death Fleet appearing early, to deliver their ultimatum in person. Instead, they saw something that made no sense at all. A single ship had appeared at the very edge of Tau Ceti space, right where the Vorthak Armada was expected to arrive. But this wasn't a Vorthak vessel. It was small, maybe a kilometer long at most, with sharp angles and clean lines that looked almost primitive compared to the flowing curves and bioorganic designs that most advanced species preferred. The ship's hull was a dull gray metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Quelix stared at the display, his gills fluttering in confusion. What is that thing? It's moving to intercept the Vorthak fleet. That's suicide, pure suicide. The ship was indeed moving with purpose toward the incoming armada, like a single warrior walking onto a battlefield to face an entire army. It showed no signs of fear, no hesitation, no attempt to hide or run. It simply flew straight toward certain death with a determination that was either incredibly brave or completely insane. Counselor Vextar, whose people had the best sensor technology in the galaxy, studied the readings with growing bewilderment. I've never seen a design like this. The energy signatures are all wrong. It's not using plasma drives or quantum tunneling or anything we recognize. And look at this. No identification codes, no diplomatic flags, no communication attempts. What kind of species sends one ship against the most powerful war fleet in the galaxy? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, because no one had an answer that made any sense. Admiral Thokmar stood on the bridge of the Devastator, the most feared warship in Vorthak history. His massive form towered over his crew, all 4 of his yellow eyes gleaming with cruel amusement as he watched the tiny speck approaching his fleet. The bridge around him was a cathedral of destruction, with weapon control panels stretching in every direction and holographic displays showing the firepower of 12 dreadnoughts ready to unleash hell. His crew, creatures that looked like a nightmare mix of mantis and shark, clicked their razor-sharp mandibles in what passed for laughter among their kind. The sound echoed through the bridge like breaking glass, a chorus of predators who had never known defeat. They had been born into an empire built on fear, raised on stories of worlds burning and enemies fleeing in terror. To them, this single, small ship approaching their armada was the funniest joke they had ever seen. Thokmar's voice boomed across the communication channels, carried by subspace transmitters powerful enough to be heard across half the galaxy. "Unknown vessel, you have exactly 30 seconds to identify yourself before we reduce you to atoms and scatter those atoms across the void. Speak quickly, because my patience grows thin." The response that came back made everyone on the bridge pause. The voice was calm, steady, and spoke in perfect galactic standard, without any hint of fear or uncertainty. More shocking still, it carried an accent that no one recognized, with pronunciations that seemed almost musical compared to the harsh guttural sounds most species made when speaking the common tongue. "This is Captain Hyunwoo of the UES Retribution. You are trespassing in protected space. Turn your ships around and leave this system immediately. This is your only warning." The bridge fell silent for a moment. Then Thokmar's laughter began, starting as a low rumble in his chest and building to a roar that shook the deck plates. His crew joined in, their mandibles clicking so fast it sounded like a hailstorm on metal. The idea that this tiny ship was giving them orders was beyond ridiculous. It was like a mouse threatening a pack of wolves. Thokmar wiped moisture from his eyes with one of his forearms and leaned forward toward the communication console. "Protected by whom, insect? What pathetic species has sent you here to die for? These worthless worlds? Are you from the Meridian colonies, the crystal beings? Some new race too stupid to know better?" The answer that came back changed everything. "By humanity." The single word hit the bridge like a physical blow. Every sound stopped. Every mandible went still. Even the background hum of the ship's engines seemed to quiet, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Thokmar felt his four hearts skip beats as ancient memories stirred in the deepest parts of his mind. Humanity, the ghost species, the legends that parents whispered to their children when they wanted to scare them into behaving. Stories passed down through generations spoke of a race that had once walked among the stars like gods, beings so advanced and so terrible that even the oldest empires had feared them. But those were just myths, weren't they? Tales told around. Campfires to make the darkness seem more interesting. Thokmar's voice cracked slightly as he spoke, though he tried to hide his sudden uncertainty behind anger. "Humanity is extinct. They've been gone for thousands of years if they ever existed at all. You're lying and we will demonstrate the price of deception." He turned to his weapons officer, a scarred veteran who had burned 100 worlds. "Fire." A warning shot. "Show this fool what happens to those who waste our time with fairy tales." The weapons officer's claws danced across his control panel, and the Devastator's main plasma cannon came to life. This weapon was a monster that could vaporize asteroids the size of small moons, a beam of superheated gas that burned hotter than most stars. It had cracked planets and boiled oceans. The targeting systems locked onto the human ship, and with a sound like thunder being born, the cannon fired. The beam of pure destruction lanced across space, bright enough to blind anyone looking directly at it. It struck the human vessel dead center, carrying enough energy to turn a mountain range into vapor. Every Vorthak on the bridge watched their displays, waiting to see the debris cloud that would be all that remained of the foolish ship that had dared to threaten them. But nothing happened. The human ship didn't explode, it didn't break apart. It didn't even seem to notice that it had just been hit by enough firepower to level a city. The vessel continued on its course, completely unharmed, as if the most powerful weapon in the Vorthak arsenal was nothing more than a gentle breeze. Thokmar stared at his displays, his four eyes wide with disbelief. Around him, his crew had gone completely silent, their mandibles hanging open in shock. For the first time in 3 centuries, a Vorthak weapon had failed to destroy its target. Captain Hyunwoo stood perfectly still in the center of his bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, as he watched the tactical displays with calm, steady eyes. Around him, his crew worked with the quiet efficiency that came from years of training and preparation. The bridge of the Retribution was nothing. Like the grand, intimidating command centers that other species favored, it was clean, functional, and filled with technology that hummed so quietly it was almost silent. Lieutenant Ji-Hai looked up from her weapons console, her fingers dancing across holographic controls that responded to her touch with soft blue light. She had been monitoring their defensive systems during the Vorthak attack, and her report came with the kind of professional calm that would have shocked any alien observer. "All systems are running perfectly, Captain. Their plasma burst barely made our shields flicker. Energy absorption was at maybe 2% of maximum capacity." The fact that the most powerful weapon in the Vorthak arsenal had been shrugged off, like a light summer rain, didn't seem to surprise anyone on the human bridge. They had expected this outcome, had planned for it, had built their ship specifically to handle threats that the rest of the galaxy considered unstoppable. Navigator. Dong Min, a young officer whose family had been preparing for this moment for generations, suddenly straightened at his station. His voice carried a note of urgency that cut through the bridge's quiet atmosphere. "Sir, long-range sensors are showing the Vorthak fleet changing formation. They're spreading out into attack pattern Omega-7 and adjusting their heading. Captain, they're targeting the civilian colonies on Tau Ceti Prime." The words hit Captain Hyunwoo like a physical blow, though his expression barely changed. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign of the fury building inside him. Tau Ceti Prime was home to 8 million souls, innocent families, who had never hurt anyone. Children playing in parks and going to school, elderly people tending gardens and telling stories to their grandchildren. The Vorthak were about to turn all of them into ash and memory, just to make a point. This was exactly what humanity had been preparing for. This was why they had spent centuries building ships in the dark spaces between stars, developing weapons. That pushed the very limits of physics, training crews who could face any horror the galaxy might throw at them. The Vorthak Empire represented everything that humanity despised about the universe they had found beyond Earth. Cruelty for its own sake, strength used to crush the weak, terror as a tool of control. Hyunwoo's voice, when he spoke, was as cold and sharp as a blade made of winter itself. "Tactical Officer Minho, I want targeting solutions on their flagship immediately. Paint every one of their capital ships while you're at it." Minho had been waiting for this order his entire life. His parents had been weapons engineers. His grandparents had been part of the original deep space reconnaissance missions that had first discovered the horrors lurking in the galaxy's dark corners. He worked at his console with the precision of a master craftsman, his targeting computers analyzing enemy shield frequencies, armor composition, and structural weak points in seconds that would have taken other species hours to calculate. "All targets locked and ready, sir. Primary focus on their flagship, secondary targets designated and queued. Weapons are hot and waiting for your command." Captain Hyunwoo looked one more time at the tactical display, seeing the Vorthak ships moving into position to rain death on innocent civilians. He thought about every world that had burned under their guns, every species that had been enslaved or exterminated, every cry for help that had gone unanswered because no one had been strong enough to stand against the empire of monsters. That age was ending today. Fire. The Retribution became death incarnate. Particle beam cannons, weapons that channeled the raw fury of stellar cores, lanced out across space with beams so intense they turned the void itself into streams of burning light. These weren't the crude plasma weapons that most species used, but precisely controlled streams of subatomic particles accelerated to speeds that made them more destructive than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They sliced through Vorthak shields as if they were made of paper, cutting deep into hulls that had never been scratched by enemy fire. Quantum torpedoes followed the particle beams, each one a marvel of human engineering that contained enough compressed space-time to create localized gravitational anomalies. When they struck their targets, they didn't just explode. They folded reality around enemy ships, crushing 3 massive Vorthak dreadnoughts into points so dense that they became tiny black holes swallowing everything around them, including light itself. But perhaps most terrifying of all were the kinetic projectiles, simple tungsten rods accelerated by magnetic coils to 99% of light speed. These weapons carried no explosives, needed no complex technology, were nothing more than metal moving very, very fast. When they hit, they released more energy than nuclear weapons, punching through armor that had been forged in the hearts of dying stars and coming out the other side without slowing down. The Vorthak fleet, which had ruled the galaxy through fear for 3 centuries, began dying. Ships that had crushed entire civilizations cracked open like eggs. Vessels that had been thought unsinkable broke apart in brilliant explosions that lit up the darkness of space. In 30 seconds, half of the most powerful armada ever assembled simply ceased to exist, reduced to expanding clouds of superheated gas and twisted metal. The age of Vorthak supremacy was over, and humanity had barely gotten started. Admiral Thorkamar felt his world collapse around him as he watched his mighty fleet being torn apart like paper dolls in a hurricane. Ships that had been the terror of 1,000 worlds were dying in brilliant explosions that painted the darkness of space with fire and twisted metal. The Worldbreaker, a dreadnought that had personally cracked 7 planets, simply vanished, in a flash of light so bright it temporarily blinded his senses. The Death's Crown, commanded by his own brother, broke in half when something moving faster than his instruments could track punched clean through its armored core. His 4 hands shook as he gripped the command rail, his yellow eyes wide with a terror he had never known existed. For 3 centuries, the Vorthak had been the apex predators of the galaxy. They were the monsters that other monsters feared, the shadow that made entire species surrender without a fight. But now they were the ones being hunted, and their hunter was something beyond their worst nightmares. "All vessels retreat, retreat now!" Thokmar's voice cracked as he screamed the order across all communication channels. "Emergency jump to hyperspace, get us out of here!" But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it was too late. The human warship moved through space like it was dancing, flowing between his ships with a grace that defied physics. It seemed to anticipate every move his fleet made, always appearing exactly where it needed to be, to deliver death with surgical precision. When his remaining ships tried to scatter in different directions, the Retribution somehow managed to engage multiple targets simultaneously, its weapons firing in patterns that should have been impossible for a single vessel to coordinate. The human ship's weapon systems were beyond anything in Vorthak technology, beyond anything any species had ever dreamed possible. Energy beams that could slice through quantum-hardened armor, projectiles that moved so fast they seemed to teleport from gun to target, and strangest of all, some kind of technology that seemed to bend space itself around enemy ships, crushing them from all directions at once. Captain Hyunwoo's voice suddenly filled the subspace channels, transmitted on every frequency used by every species in known space. His tone was calm, professional, but underneath the politeness was something that made Thokmar's blood freeze in his veins. It was the voice of someone who had made a decision that could not be changed, someone who had the power to enforce his will across the entire galaxy. "I am transmitting this message to every world in Vorthak space, and to every government that has ever dealt with the Vorthak Empire," the human captain said, his words carrying across light years to reach the ears of billions of beings. "Your empire's reign of terror ends today. Any vessel that fires upon civilians will be destroyed without warning. Any world that harbors war criminals will be blockaded until justice is served. Any attempt to rebuild your military for aggressive purposes will be met with immediate intervention." The transmission continued, and Thokmar realized with growing horror that this wasn't just a threat directed at his fleet. This was a declaration of war against everything the Vorthak Empire stood for, broadcast to every corner of space where his people held power. The human wasn't just destroying his armada, he was dismantling his entire civilization with words that carried the weight of absolute authority. On the bridge of the Retribution, Communications Officer So Young looked up from her station with an expression of amazement. Her console was lighting up like a festival display as messages poured in from across Vorthak space. "Captain, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 Vorthak colonies. They're asking for terms and offering to hand over their military. Commanders for trial. Hyunwoo nodded without surprise, as if he had expected this exact outcome. What about their remaining fleet? So-young checked her displays again, filtering through the chaos of emergency broadcasts and panicked communications. 4 ships left, sir. The survivors are broadcasting unconditional surrender on all frequencies. They're asking permission to retrieve their escape pods and requesting safe passage to neutral space. The captain was quiet for a moment, studying the tactical display that showed the wreckage of what had once been the most feared fleet in the galaxy. Debris clouds marked the graves of ships that had terrorized innocent worlds for centuries. Escape pods drifted among the wreckage, carrying survivors who would have to live with the knowledge that their empire of fear had been broken by a single human vessel. "Signal the remaining ships," Hyunwoo said finally. "Tell them to collect their survivors and escort them to the nearest neutral station. Make sure they understand the new reality. Humanity is watching now. We know where every Vorthak military installation is located. We know which commanders ordered attacks on civilian populations. We know which worlds profited from slave labor, and which governors turned a blind eye to genocide." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "The age of hiding behind superior firepower is over. From this day forward, any species that chooses to prey upon the weak will answer to us. Any government that uses terror as a tool of control will find itself facing human justice. The galaxy has new guardians, and we will not be ignored." In the depths of space around Tau Ceti, the survivors of the Vorthak Armada limped away in their damaged ships, carrying with them the news that would reshape the balance of power across 1,000 worlds. The empire that had ruled through fear for 3 centuries had been humbled by a species that most had believed was nothing more than legend. But humanity was very real, and they had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. The Galactic Council chambers had witnessed many historic moments over the centuries, but nothing like this. The massive amphitheater, built to hold representatives from over 200 different species, was so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the air recycling systems. Delegates who normally argued and debated with passionate intensity sat frozen, in their seats, staring at the main view screen with expressions of awe, fear, and disbelief. On the screen, Captain Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the Retribution, the ship that had just rewritten the rules of galactic warfare. Behind him, through the bridge's main viewport, Tau Ceti Prime hung like a blue-green jewel against the star-filled darkness. The planet was safe now, its 8 million inhabitants protected by a guardian they had never expected to see. Captain Hyunwoo looked directly into the camera, his dark eyes carrying a weight of authority that seemed to reach across the light years and into the hearts of everyone watching. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, but every word carried the power of absolute conviction. "Honorable representatives of the Galactic Council," he began, using the traditional greeting that had opened diplomatic sessions for 1,000 years. "My name is Captain Hyunwoo of the United Earth ship, Retribution. Humanity has been observing your conflicts for the past millennium. We watched from the shadows, hoping to find wisdom among the stars, hoping to discover civilizations that had learned to live in peace and harmony." He paused, and his expression grew sadder. "Instead, we found a galaxy ruled by fear. We saw species like the Vorthak Empire using their strength to crush the weak. We witnessed genocide disguised as territorial expansion. We watched as bullies, with big ships, terrorized entire worlds, and no one was strong enough to stop them." Behind the captain, his bridge crew continued their work with quiet efficiency. Engineer Jamin monitored readouts from the ship's quantum reactors, technology so advanced it made the best Galactic Council scientists look like children playing with toys. Science Officer Yu Jin was analyzing the debris field that floated, in space around them, the twisted remains of what had once been the most feared warfleet in known space. Her instruments were cataloging wreckage that would revolutionize the understanding of weapons technology across dozens of species. The captain's voice grew warmer as he continued his address. "But we also saw something else. We saw species like the Meridians, who chose to build beautiful underwater cities instead of weapons of war. We watched the Verdani nurture entire forests across multiple worlds, creating gardens of peace in the darkness of space. We observed the crystal beings of the shard worlds who communicated through light and music instead of threats and violence. In the council chambers, Ambassador Quelix of the Meridians felt tears forming in his large dark eyes. His people had suffered under Vorthak oppression for so long that he had almost forgotten what hope felt like. Around him, other delegates from peaceful species sat straighter in their chairs, suddenly feeling less alone in a galaxy that had seemed dominated by predators. To these peaceful species, and to any others who choose the path of cooperation, over conquest, humanity extends its hand in friendship, Captain Hyunwoo said. We offer our knowledge, our protection, and our partnership in building a better future for all sentient life. His expression hardened again, and his next words carried the force of an unbreakable promise. But let this serve as notice to any who would continue the old ways of ruling through fear and violence. The age of galactic bullies is over. Earth stands ready to defend those who cannot defend themselves. Any species that chooses to prey upon the innocent will find themselves facing human justice. As the captain's transmission continued, something extraordinary began happening throughout the galaxy. Long-range sensor stations operated by dozens of different species started detecting new contacts appearing in empty space. Ships were emerging. From hiding places that had concealed them for centuries, vessels that had been invisible to even the most advanced detection systems until they chose to reveal themselves. These weren't invasion fleets or conquest armadas. They were guardians, human ships taking up positions throughout known space like silent sentinels. A destroyer-class vessel appeared near the Meridian homeworld, its presence a promise that no one would ever again threaten their peaceful underwater cities. A heavy cruiser materialized in orbit around the Verdani garden worlds, ensuring that their forests would continue to grow in safety. But perhaps most importantly, smaller human ships began appearing near worlds that had suffered under various forms of oppression. Planets where dictators had crushed their own people suddenly found human vessels watching from orbit. Star systems where pirates had preyed on merchant ships discovered that Earth's navy was now patrolling their trade routes. The message was clear and unmistakable. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. They had built ships in secret, trained crews in hidden bases, and watched the galaxy's bullies compile their crimes. Now the watching was over, and the age of consequences had begun. Captain Hyunwoo's final words echoed through the council chambers and across subspace to every corner of civilized space. The galaxy has new guardians now. We will not rule over you, we will not demand tribute or submission, and we will not impose our will on peaceful species. But neither will we allow the strong to prey upon the weak. That age is finished forever. As his image faded from the viewscreen, delegates throughout the council chambers began to understand that they were witnessing the birth of a new era. The galaxy would never be the same again, and for the first time in centuries, that was a reason for hope rather than fear.